Welcome, folks. Welcome to tonight's program. My name is Michael Wood. I am the Senior Curator at the Chicago Architecture Center. We will get started at the top of the hour. So we have about 15 minutes or so. I see some people are streaming in. As is kind of customary around here, if you want to acknowledge who you are, say who you are, where you're dialing in from. It's always nice for us to get a sense of the community in front of us today. And welcome to what is Open House Chicago Festival Month for us. You'll be seeing some various slides rolling over the next few minutes. I think the important takeaways for this month is that all things Open House Chicago are now occupying the entire month of October. There are certainly many ways that you can participate. We have a mobile application, which includes some information about the sites in this year's festival, along with self-guided trails, information about our community partners and others. That's available all month long. You can download the app by going to openhousechicago.org. We have a series of public programs happening throughout the daytime and evening throughout the month. Tonight's program, Revisiting Learning from North Lawndale, is one of those programs. And of course, the traditional open house weekend is not this weekend, but next weekend on the 16th and 17th. We have over 100 sites throughout the city open for you to investigate for free. And so plenty to do this month. We also have a series of interesting programs happening in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire. In fact, we have a program this Thursday with a great panel that will be debunking some common myths about the fire and providing a lot more nuance into the story of things that went into the Great Chicago Fire and how it has shaped the city's psyche ever since. On November 3rd, we have a very special final program about the fire, which is a live storytelling event. We have a master storyteller, Scott Whitehair, who is going to be giving a live kind of dramatic reading and reinterpretation and enlivening some personal narratives from the fire. So lots going on at the Chicago Architecture Center. You can see on the slides some upcoming programs. All of the Open House Chicago programs this month are free. So sign up, join us. Every program, including tonight's program, are always recorded and then sent within 2 business days to all attendees. And you are given about a week to watch them. So you can sign up for every Open House Chicago program, whether or not you can join us live or not. We would love for you to hear from our community partners and learn some of the stories that are happening and shaping Chicago today, all part of Open House Chicago Month. One of our colleagues, who you probably all know, many on this call, Hallie Rosen, who's done so much to make Open House Chicago stand up this year, is helping us out in the chat. She's putting some links to upcoming programs and some places where you can download our app and other things. If anyone's coming from far away, please do let us know in the chat. Say who you are and where you're from. It's always nice to know where we're drawing our audience from. It's a big month for us. Open House Chicago is usually participated well over 100,000 people we reach over that traditional weekend. And those numbers only grow when we make it a month-long festival. We generally draw people from all 50 states and from many, many other countries. But of course, about 80% of attendees come from Chicago and the greater Chicagoland area. I see we have one friend here coming from Indiana. Welcome. Again, if you've just joined us, you are in the right place. We have a program that starts at the top of the hour, Revisiting Learning from North Lawndale. And at the moment, we're welcoming people as they dial in. We have about a few dozen with us right now, and we're expecting many more over the next few minutes. Welcome to Marty, joining us from North Carolina. It's commemorations all over the place. I see we have an upcoming public program looking at, in anticipation of the 200th anniversary of the birth of Frederick Law Olmsted. That's by one of our good colleagues here in town, Julia Backrack, a longtime archivist and preservationist at the Park District, now her own consultant. Backrack Consulting. Steve, welcome from Columbia, Missouri. Great to have you with us. Hope we'll see some of these as recurring names over the course of the month. We have lots in store for Open House Chicago month. It's a great chance for us to really put our community partners forward and to show you some of the great work happening in neighborhoods all around the city. So Steve, I understand that you do come to several of our programs. Are you looking forward to anything in particular with Open House this year? Again, we're just getting ready for tonight's program, which starts at the top of the hour, Revisiting Learning from North Lawndale. If you are joining us and you remember the 2006 exhibition that was the basis for tonight's program, please let us know. It's always nice to know if there's some longtime friends of CAF with us, and possibly even some people who have been instrumental in bringing this year's Chicago Architecture Biennial together. All of it kind of traces back in many ways to this 2006 exhibition we'll be talking about tonight. Steve says he's looking forward to all the online programs. It's a great way for us to extend our reach. One of the kind of real silver linings in the pandemic is that so much of the virtual programming that's happening at CAF and so much of the online mobile programs as part of Open House Chicago really were necessity last year, but it really has allowed us to welcome a whole new set of audience and to really lessen a lot of accessibility barriers. Again, what you're seeing scrolling through the pre-roll are some upcoming programs that are all part of Open House Chicago. All of these programs can be found at openhousechicago.org. All of these programs are free. All of our programs are recorded, always sent back to you, all attendees, within 48 hours of the conclusion of the program, just like tonight. And yes, thank you all for joining us. If you are a first timer, please do use the chat. Tell us who you are. Where you're joining us from. Tonight's program is a partnership program with the Chicago Architecture Biennial, so I'm sure there'll be some new faces to us here at the center in today's program. We're going to get going in just about 5 minutes. Tonight's program is just a 1-hour program, so the program itself runs from 6 to 7 p.m. and we'll get going in just a moment. Welcome, everyone. If you're just joining us, tonight's program starts at the top of the hour, Revisiting Learning from North Lawndale. We are taking a pause here while we welcome everybody to dial in. We'll get started right around 6 o'clock Central. Okay, sorry, just rearranging a few things. As I said at the beginning of the program, just about 10 minutes ago during pre-roll, this is a really big month for the Chicago Architecture Center. It's Open House Chicago Festival Month. We have a lot of public programs, online programs on tap this month. All of those programs are free. You can read all about them at openhousechicago.org. And that same web address is where you can download the mobile application, which is a supplement to this year's Open House Chicago program. Our mobile app has additional information about our 100+ sites, which you can visit during the open house weekend, October 16th and 17th. So not this weekend, but next weekend. The mobile application also has a series of self-guided tours, what we call trails, which really are curated offerings from the CAC staff. There are dozens and dozens of them. The app is free to download. So if you've not made your way to openhousechicago.org, now is a great time to do it. This is a month full of lots of programming. I'll make one last plug that this is also an important time with lots of programs around the city commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire. We have a panel program this Thursday morning, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. A great panel of historians looking to burst some of the myths that we live with and some of the ways that the Great Chicago Fire has really shaped the psyche of the city. If this is your first time joining us, please know that we do use the Q&A function. If you have a question for our panelists during the program, please avail yourself of the Q&A function at any time. We do sift through the questions. We try to get to as many as possible. In tonight's program, we will be taking questions throughout. Tonight's program is from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Central. So just 1 hour long, a discussion-based program. And we will get going in just a moment, right at the top of the hour. Welcome, everyone. As a final thought, as we get ready to start tonight's program, I'd just like to call attention that today is our public program, and we're about to do is part of Open House Chicago. We have a month-long festival. You can participate online, you can participate in person next weekend. Lots going on this month. And our partner for tonight's program is the Chicago Architecture Biennial. Of course, the biennial has all sorts of programming going on throughout fall into December. I'd like to call up now as we get going with tonight's program. If I could call Marguerite Winter, who is the manager of public programs and partnerships at the biennial. I'd love for you to say a quick word and welcome tonight's audience as we get going.
Thank you so much, Michael. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. As Michael said, my name is Marguerite Winter, and I'm the manager of public programs and partnerships at the Chicago Architecture Biennial. And CAB is thrilled to be partnering with the Chicago Architecture Center for this evening's program, Revisiting Learning from North Lawndale. This program is part of CAB's In Dialogue series, presented by Hyman Auctions, which takes place virtually on Tuesdays during this current edition. The Available City, which is currently on view now through December 18th. The Available City is a framework for a collaborative, community-led design approach that presents transformative possibilities for vacant urban spaces that are created with and for local residents. Tonight's program traces its roots back to the groundbreaking 2006 Chicago Architecture Foundation exhibit, Learning from North Lawndale, Past, Present, and Future. Our speakers revisit the making of the exhibit and explore how much we can still learn from the richness of North Lawndale and the experience there. I will now hand it back over to Michael to welcome our speakers. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Great. Thank you, Marguerite, and thanks to the biennial and the team for helping put together tonight's program and for all that they do throughout the fall program with the biennial. It's already been said tonight that the subject of our program for the next hour is revisiting the Learning from North Lawndale Past, Present, and Future exhibition, which took place at the Chicago Architecture Center in 2006, at the time, the Chicago Architecture Foundation. Tonight's program is part of our Open House 2021 Festival and part of the Chicago Architecture Biennial 2021 edition. Tonight's program is a group discussion, and we're pleased to take audience questions throughout the hour-long program. So please do use the Q&A function whenever you'd like. And if we see something that we think we should address right away, we will. There won't be a held Q&A at the end. We'll take questions throughout. So if I could now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists. Everyone, please open up your cameras and mics. Great. Joining us now is David Brown. David is a designer, a researcher, and an educator based at the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He is also serving as the artistic director for this year's edition of the Chicago Architecture Biennial, The Available City, which draws on more than a decade plus of his own research into the urban design potential of Chicago's thousands of city-owned vacant lots. Welcome, David. Next up is Blanche Killingsworth. Blanche, do I see you? I want to make sure that I'm seeing all names. Yep, great. Now, Blanche is the president and co-founder of North Lawndale Historical Society, which is an organization devoted to researching and archiving and educating the public about the history of Lawndale. She's also a diversity scholar at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and she's someone who has given and continues to give her boundless energy and care in furtherance of the North Lawndale community. Welcome, Blanche. And then finally, Ned Cramer is an architect, an architecture and design communication advisor based in Washington, D.C. Many of you may recognize his name as the founding editor-in-chief of Architect Magazine, a post that he held from 2006 to 2020. But prior to joining the magazine, Cramer was the first full-time curator at the Chicago Architecture Foundation. In 2012, he helped co-curate Spontaneous Interventions at the US Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennial. So welcome, everyone. I'd like to kick off our program now with a question for you, Ned. As curator, your attention was probably on a lot of different things at CAF at the time. So who were the early characters that helped brought learning from Lawndale, the exhibit, into being? And at the time that it all started, how clear to you was it, the story that you were about to embark on telling?
It's good to be back at the CAC. Thank you for having me. And I'm delighted that we're learning from North Lawndale. The program really would never have happened had it not been for a man named Charles Leakes, who worked at a nonprofit in North Lawndale that helped residents with planning for mortgages and home buying in the neighborhood. He wasn't himself a North Lawndale native, but he fell in love with the community. And I think you'll likely hear his name invoked repeatedly during the course of this conversation. So when people say Charles, that's who they're talking about. And Charles was one of those kind of once in a lifetime, once in a generation people who was kind and thoughtful and an incredible leader, basically, who convened this group of community members, of experts in different fields, of people at presenting organizations and academic institutions. And I believe the introduction to him came from Robert Brugman, the urbanist scholar who introduced me to Charles into North Lawndale, which I had only kind of known because I had driven past the old Sears factory on the freeway. I, thanks in part to Charles's incredible knowledge of the community and love of the community, fell in love with the place, basically immediately. The history, the richness of the history was incredibly powerful. And the question about the community's future was incredibly poignant. And so I was fortunate enough that the board and leadership at CAF were enthusiastic about the idea of partnering with the community. And we began to kind of convene regularly with a large group in North Lawndale on a regular basis, with the idea really that this exhibition and it as a kind of communications vehicle could really be a triggering event for a host of potential activities, whether that's awareness of the incredibly rich housing stock of Graystones, or the the opportunity for dedicated residents to build on the research by sharing their stories, by creating their own organizations to begin to kind of carry that storytelling process and stewardship process forward.
Blanche, I think you had mentioned this is an exhibit that laid across several themes, from institutions to entertainment, housing to religion. I think 10 themes in all. But in talking about Charles, you said it was a long-term agenda in mind from the start. So how do you feel that this exhibit has served North Lawndale over the years?
Well, the exhibit, Michael, and to everyone, welcome, is 31 panels. Each panel represents a section of North Lawndale, from entertainment, housing, industrial, gardening, things of this nature. And the way that the exhibit was structured, it can be a continuation of those different areas. As a matter of fact, the panels gave a guide to North Lawndale assets, if you will. Charles wanted the world to know what he had discovered. He was like a young child when he came into North Lawndale, and he would pull me and Matt around and say, "Did you see that over there? Do you know what that is there?" So as they developed these panels, the 31 areas identified, showing the assets and the continuation and the growth that community, that our community could have. Knowing that, the panels also gave the North Lawndale Historical and Cultural Society the basis to start its research. And as we move forward now, Micah, we are taking each panel and researching and digging down into it, continuing the research that Ned and David did. Because if you look at those panels now, look at the information now, you will find out that some of the things that happened then is happening now, because they're historical panels. And it's helping North Lawndale actually get its name on the map, in a sense. It's always been there. It's always been there. We've always been here. But like with the Central Park Theater, it's just a glimpse of what our community has to offer.
It's been said a few times, David, that North Lawndale's connection to well-known individuals and individual moments of notoriety have not added up to a distinctive identity. Do you think there's any truth to that? You've studied the neighborhood, you've been in the neighborhood for a while. Do you think there's something about North Lawndale that was difficult to capture, and that the exhibit was trying to put into a broader container for a bigger public?
I think I guess I would say it does have an identity, and I think it's very much within I think the community across its history, and almost maybe a sense of kind of activism that's there. And I think that's both in kind of its Jewish history and both in its Black history. Most notably, it was Golda Meir was living there for a period. Martin Luther King lived here for a period. And I think, and I would say probably maybe Charles was a kind of stimulus for gaining an awareness of that activism. And I think influencing a number of individuals that have continued to do things of late, that I think look to carry forward this idea of really wanting to foreground the neighborhood's history. But I think the exhibit was really trying to show that across those various categories, that there was something of significance within each one of them. So that could range from even just the kind of, this was the entry point from into the city along Route 66, or entry or exit, I guess, depending on which way you're going. Blues history, Benny Goodman played here. Sears was located here, the other factories that were surrounding it. And really what was and again, I think if you started to look at the history more closely, seeing these types of continuities in terms of again, kind of King say, and then the riots that follow, and I think the conservative vice lords in terms of the activism that they were demonstrating in a period following. I think the Graystone history is one of the things that I think that was maybe one of the first things that Charles started to identify in relationship to his work relative to housing. So really recognizing that there was a housing stock that he thought was significant in a way that was similar to the bungalows. And so really talking about maybe almost a kind of Graystone belt, but there being, and projecting that there were maybe more Graystones in North Lawndale than any other neighborhood, which I think is how he started to make the connection to this as a kind of architecture exhibit. And then also the history of Sears, et cetera.
I want to show a few images that I'm going to ask you to chime in a bit about. And one of the ironies is that we do not have pictures of the panels, but Blanche has in fact had the panels in her own possession ever since. So while I queue up the images, Blanche, tell our audience a little bit about how you trucked out these metal panels and where they've been living, because you really are a steward of this exhibit for decades now.
Yes, those panels, Charles had, once the exhibit ended and the Sears building closed down, Charles had those panels stored at an NHS office for safety. When that office shut down, I went out and collected those panels, 31 steel panels from Roseland, the Roseland office. And I had a question to myself. You're going to get 31 steel panels. You don't have a brick and mortar. Blanche, where are you going to put them? You can't put them in your living room. Can't put them in your trunk. So I approached Jim Buick of Roscoe's Laundry Company. I'm sorry. That company was once called Garden City. It has been in North Lawndale since the 20s. And I asked Jim if he would allow me to put the panels there and keep them safe for me until we did get a place to set those panels back up. Now, as you look at this map, those panels also, and this map here, has helped the Historical Society develop an asset map. Those panels meant a lot to the community. They came from downtown, they went into the Sears building, 3333, in the art gallery. It stayed there. People came and looked at them there. I feel like the panels that we have is actually a keeper of North Lawndale's history because it touches on so many segments of North Lawndale. As you stated before, Ned, David, rather, the go to my ear was, as Charles asked me once, well, Blanche, why was she there? Why did the Prime Minister of Israel come into North Lawndale? How many people? I said, well, look at Route 66. He said, yes, Route 66, 6.6 mile, 3.2 in North Lawndale. And he researched it, and we found out since then, because as I said, the panels are a continuation process for us, that how many people know Pat Sajak once sent out a message there as a radio announcer? How many people know that, and I can just go on, Ben Geller, Chevrolet there, that Al Capone had his car, maybe it's a Bessie dealership there, made, but he took it to another place in Berwyn and had it bulletproof. So if you look at North Lawndale and the panels and the things that it represents, the living and learning from North Lawndale. I lived North Lawndale. I came there in 1962. I lived North Lawndale. I learned from North Lawndale. I raised my child in North Lawndale. So saying all of that, what those panels represent, the living, the people that are still there, such as Mr. Clyde Ross of the Contract Buyers League. So many, Miss Dorita Penn, who's been there forever, the cousins, How many people know that her daughter, Earth Rain cousin, was once the ambassador for the UN and the food project that they had? So all of these things, all of these people represent North Lawndale. I hope I answered you. I hope I
So
did.
that's great. I'm going to take us through a couple of images to get some commentary. Ned, I assume the idea of some asset mapping came up early in the process and was seen as an idea that would be beneficial to the community. But maybe you could just say a quick word about, I believe these are the institutions you are mapping in North Lawndale, but just a quick kind of thought back about what the idea was for asset mapping.
Sure. I mean, there were really kind of two parallel conversations around the built fabric of the community. History. So research was happening on a number of levels. One very important strain that David mentioned was the kind of documentation of the graystones as a building type particular to North Lawndale. But that obviously was talking about thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of buildings. The other were the incredible institutional buildings built over time along the avenues and in the park. So there was an effort to document them, photograph them, find out about them to the degree that it was possible in terms of who designed them, who built them, who paid for them, and who used them.
So some images like this, David, reach back obviously deep into the history of the neighborhood. Do you remember some of the thoughts here about trying to capture what was in the neighborhood?
I think, yes, really just trying to show what has been life there across generations. And I think too, one of the things that it was easy to begin to locate photographs that were in various archives that were talking about the earlier history. And then I think really also just trying to show, and I think in some ways maybe juxtapose what was different and what was maybe the same at different moments and generations. But we also were consciously building an archive of photos by current residents in terms of really trying to provide a way in which one could see who had lived there in the past, what were some of the changes in terms of the population.
What is the idea behind this? This is called the Shoe Box Graystone. Can you say a quick word about this?
These are out in K-Town, so a little bit more west of, I believe, Pulaski. But
Yes.
they're these one-story graystones, which they're distinct in this area. And most everywhere else, you have 2 or 3-story graystones. But out in K-Town, and it is now a historic district through the work of Paul Norrington, I believe, where you have these one-story shoebox graystones. And I don't know their full origin, but I think really looking to continue the tradition of construction, but I don't know exactly why there was a demand for a smaller scale or pressure for a smaller scale.
The understanding that I have on that, David, was that was the workman
Okay.
Cottage. Yeah, a version. Now, what on earth are we seeing here? Because you had talked about a history of activism, so maybe you could say a quick word about images like this.
This is from a photo from the 80s, and it's Mr. Earls, Gerald and Lorraine Earls started one of the first community gardens in North Lawndale. Blanche will be able to tell us there's maybe about 30 community gardens there to this day.
Yes.
And so they were really one of the early community gardeners in the neighborhood. So they have a garden called Slumbuster's Garden. They also did a lot of documentation of the state of the neighborhood in terms of where there were high levels of standing water. So Mr. Earls here looking to demonstrate comedically the presence of standing water, that it was kind of deep enough in this driveway or parking lot to to go fishing and catch a fish. Also where there were severe disrepair or kind of crumbling sidewalks, dumping in vacant lots. and really starting to try to initiate some gardening in some other areas as well.
Ned, this I believe is the Hebrew library, maybe a little bit more typical for CAF, but had you been part of a project that tried to catalog everything in a community, in a sense, to work through an exhibit to set the ground for activism or organization making? I don't know if I can hear you.
Yes, especially because I think preservation was seen as a really essential component of the community's future, right? That it would provide a bedrock economically and in many other ways for the community to undergo economic development, encourage investment in the community and so forth.
Yeah. David, you've now had several interactions with architecture organizations that have kept you coming back to and through North Lawndale. What do you feel like you have, well, I guess I'll say this in a few different ways, but what do you feel like you have learned over the years in the interaction with Lawndale?
I think it is. I think the neighborhood from when I was there in 2004, I think there were activities happening in terms of, I think, new efforts and new construction, but I think that that those efforts have continued, and I think the number of individuals that are, I think, doing different and interesting things to really kind of promote life and the quality of life in North Lawndale, I think, has increased. I say that in terms of, I think, Blanche's continued work with Lawndale Heritage. I think, say, Heyman Cross and his initiative for really instigating Douglas 18, the renovation of the golf course. As I was saying, Paul Norrington, I think, doing both the kind of history or the Shoe Box Graystones, but then also really the sesquicentennial commemoration. The effort, I think, too, to get the presidential library in North Lawndale was started by Charles, as well as Paul Norrington and John. John's last name is gonna escape me, but a very small effort that then became an effort that combined with UIC. So we together put forward a proposal. But I think, to me, and then I think that includes in the, I guess when I first became aware of the neighborhood in 2005 in terms of really working with Charles. I want to add Suzanne Schnell was, I think, pivotal as well. Ned, as well as Bob Brugman. And so we were meeting out there weekly. And I think it's through that I had kind of really a good knowledge of the neighborhood and also people. So I think for the exhibit, and 50 designers, 50 ideas, 50 wards. I think I got the right order. I asked to focus on North Lawndale. And so that was really that was right after the 2015 exhibition for the biennial of the available city. So asked to do something in North Lawndale, and so proposed the idea of a kind of exposition of collective spaces. I think, Woody, you were the one who maybe reached out and then kind of said, oh, let's set something up with NLCCC. So that was another organization that has been active in terms of really trying to spur community development. And so an initiative across a range of organizations, but I presented to them. That's how I got some initial interest in really trying to develop a set of spaces. So I've been working with a couple of organizations since 2016. 2019, did some youth studios and workshops relative to the biennial. I think that's really what helped spur my being asked to be the artistic director for this biennial, but then quickly was able to go from those 2 sites to the 5 sites in North Lawndale. I think just through having gotten to know residents that were actively involved in different organizations that are doing interesting work. And so we're able to connect with them for additional spaces.
Well, we have some questions coming in from the crowd that I'd like to kind of go slowly through, because some really are about the exhibit and then some really are about what has grown out, and maybe some legacy questions. So this is maybe a question both for Ned and for Blanche. And so thinking very specifically on exhibit making, there's a question about whether the metal panels, whether that their material and their permanence was a deliberate choice, and whether that has, do you think, added more value than, say, you know, a poster show or something a little bit more like paper sheets. So Ned, was that a deliberate decision to do something like that? And maybe Blanche can say something about having had to lug these around now.
You know, the exhibit design itself happened. I left the Chicago Architecture Foundation about 6 months before the exhibit opened. I think my timing is right. It's been 15 years or so. So I may be fudging it. So David, I think you were probably more involved than I was in the development of the exhibit design.
Yeah, and I had to say I was probably the guilty party there. I think in terms of in part, I think in the Santa Fe building, all the exhibits needed to really just be able to rest and stand on the ground. And so I think wanting to create these spaces that you would have to, in some ways, as you would move through the lobby, engage in some respect in terms of moving around and through them. And so I think metal seemed to make a good choice in terms of having a weight where they wouldn't be easy to knock over. And then they have the additional benefit of the permanence. Because I think there was always discussion that this would be an exhibit that the community could inherit.
Could take. Blanche, there are a few questions here, historical questions. So there used to be a huge plant located at 5th Avenue in Costner. Do you know what a huge plant, just industrial plant at 5th Avenue in Costner? Do you recall what it produced and why it closed?
I can't hear you. You went out.
There's a question. Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
There's a question asking a historical question about an industrial plant that was located at 5th Avenue in Costner. Do you recall what it produced and why it closed?
It's not Acme Barrel Company.
Say that one more time.
I was thinking about Acme Barrel Company. I'm not sure what plant was there, but I do know the area that they are speaking of. Yeah.
There's a more general question asking about how contract buying contributed to the deterioration of housing stock in North Lawndale. I assume that's a story you have to tell quite a bit. Maybe
yeah, that's contract buying, which we actually have an exhibit on that as well. What it did it didn't allow African Americans to build equity in their homes. As the Jewish community left North Lawndale, there were spectators over there, land grabbers, I call them, that number one, a lot of people call it white flight, but that community of Jewish Americans was pushed out of North Lawndale out of fear. And fear that was put on by, although the same African Americans that they were fearful of work for them a lot of time down on Maxwell Street. And that's also when the separation of North Lawndale and South Lawndale came into existence too, but we won't get into that. That allowed people to capitalize on people that wanted home ownership in this way. I get a home. He done went over here, scared this man out of his home for a reasonable amount of money. He's able to go into another neighborhood where people look just like him. They're not going to be jacked on the prices. So those people moved there. What they did, they turned around and resold those houses to African Americans. Because what a lot of people need to understand, when African Americans migrated from the South, we were used to living into homes. We did not have buildings. So now we have what we used to rent or was allowed to live in a house. Now we're able to own a house. So what they did, they divided the way, whereas you would go to, say, someone like Paint City, we had a guy down there, and he would sell you a house, but you would pay him. You didn't get a mortgage. You actually had to prove to them that you was worthy of doing a mortgage. And like Mr. Ross said, he had to work 3 jobs just to afford his house. But he was never gaining equity in his home. The same home that was bought up in Skokie, say by a Jewish family that left North Lawndale, has 3 times the value of their home than someone bought a home in North Lawndale to what it is now. And a lot of that, Michael, has a lot to do with the disinvestment of the city after the riots and the repairs that's needed. One thing that you need to have in order to have home ownership, you got to have financing. You got to have financing. You need banks in your neighborhood, things of that nature. So the Contract Buyers League was an effort between Jack McNamara, Clyde Ross, Charles Baker, and I can go on with those names. They decided that I've been paying for this home months, sometimes even years, and I missed one payment and now you're evicting me. So the sheriff would come to those people's house, sit their things out on the front, and they would lose their home. So what Jack them did is decided to put together a group that would be in a resistance of that type of treatment towards not only African Americans, but people in general. That's how you got the Reinvestment Act as well. So understanding that the North Lawndale community has been disinvested in, and I will say for many, many years up until now. As I was looking at what you all were showing us about the what Mr. Earls did, I'll give you an example. Mr. Earls came in North Lawndale in the 50s. He got his property. He was able to pay for his property. When I worked for Neighborhood Housing Services, I was actually able to have people come into me that were getting liens on their home from back in the days when they bought their home on contract, because they went into debt trying to get repairs on their home. But what they didn't understand is that the repairs that they was doing, that loan they took out had actually turned into a mortgage against their home because it wasn't paying off in a timely manner. And when you see the transition of the companies that left North Lawndale during the time, you had over 1,500 people working at Sears Roebuck and Company, lived in North Lawndale, Western Electric. So as these companies left, we almost backtracked into the days of not being able to afford or have your home. So, and once again, going back to the panels, those panels show Martin Luther King that came there. Why did he come? Housing. Things that, but now with NLCCC, we have a quality of life plan that is being done that speaks on those different areas, and it has community involvement. When you come to gardening, you got the African Heritage Garden, but you got love blooms up on Douglas and Central Park that is popping now. You have the development of Ogden and Holman. You got areas in the neighborhood. You got the Central Park Theater that my group is working on. That Central Park Theater is in the Living and Learning from North Lawndale.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get off my soapbox, but I just want the audience to know that the assets that North Lawndale have is reflected in the panels that David and Charles and Ned poured together.
Going back to another thread in the history, this is for Ned and for David. I know the Graystone Initiative preservation was in about 2009, but there's a question from the audience asking, at the time of this exhibit, one recalls there might have been a few complimentary books about the history and maintenance of graystones in North Lawndale. And was that part of or related to the exhibit or somehow spun out of the exhibit?
That was a piece that I believe Roberta Feldman and Bob Brugman worked on. David, am I remembering that correctly?
That's correct. And there were actually 2 volumes. So there was one that was more about Graystone history and residents. And that's the one that Roberta and Bob Brugman worked on. And then another one was Dan Wheeler worked on in terms of really more about Graystone restoration.
Right.
And so really kind of a quick how-to guide in terms of assessing and understanding what it would take to really begin to maintain the stone and maintain the brick and other characteristics of the roof. So I think really just quickly familiarizing everyone with what would be the kind of upkeep demands and restoration demands.
Moving to a completely different topic, but again, going back to the exhibit and trying to understand it as an impetus, were there any conversations about involving schools or children in either the collection of oral history of storytelling? And if not, has anything like that now taken root with some of your work, Blanche, ever since that exhibit? So I think a general question about, was there a role for youth then? And if not then, is there an emerging role now for youth in collecting oral history and for kind of getting indoctrinated into the conversation?
One of our board members, who is Paul Norton and Peter Alter from the Chicago History Museum, back in 2019, I hope I got that right, and I hope Paul is not here, North Lawndale became 150 years old. So what was done then, they went into a school in North Lawndale and got a group of children to help research as well as interview people of the neighborhood about the history of North Lawndale. So that's one way that we're continuing to work on the schools in North Lawndale, getting young people that's interested in the history of North Lawndale and working with them, interviewing them, and have them trained to be interviewees of other people, because that is a skill set that they can continue with once they leave school.
Now,
A lot of people don't know, and I don't mean to cut you off, Michael, but Mahalia Somerville and Ma Fletcher, some of the people that were once in North Lawndale, also was women that made a movement to get African-American principals in North Lawndale. She worked at Acorn, and her efforts, they would march about education. And Dr. Rich came down to Chicago from DC. I forget what university she was from, because there was a statement put out there that the children of North Lawndale were not able and were not capable of learning. Dr. Rich with Miss Sadie Nesbitt, the principal of James Weldon Johnson School, the only African-American school in North Lawndale, made a turnaround with the youth in North Lawndale. So it was a proven fact that, and it still is now, that children need a certain amount of pride when they go into the schools. So yeah, we are currently working with young people and hope to continue working with young people. For another reason, Michael, none of us are getting any younger, and you need someone to pass that torch to. We have a time capsule that we're working on through the history of North Lawndale celebration that Mr. Norton led back in 2019. We're asking people to put objects or stories in this time capsule. We won't be around in 50 years, but the history and the story will be there.
So a whole other kind of area here that you maybe have some mixed feelings about, perhaps, and David, there's a question in the queue about whether the HBO and Showtime series that were filmed in North Lawndale, whether they had a positive economic impact or whether you have an opinion about sort of, these outside exposés or outside programs, and what can they do positively or perhaps not? Any comment?
I'm gonna maybe leave that one to Blanche. I had to confess, I don't know so much about the series myself. I'm not a big television person.
Blanche, do you
Which
have a
series are you talking about? Because we have center space over there, and everything from Chicago Med to Chicago Firehouse is shot in the North Lawndale area, someplace around the city. But what program are you talking about? The Shine?
I'm sending it over to them now, so I'll wait for a response.
Okay.
But I'm going to turn to the biennial for a moment here. So a pretty simple question, but probably there's a lot involved here, David. As we look at the available city in North Lawndale, what are you hoping that the residents get from it? And what are you hoping visitors that venture to Lawndale get from the experience? So perhaps you could start with just a quick description of the, I believe it's 5 site activations in North Lawndale. Just for those that aren't familiar, if you could start with just a quick sense of what's happening there, and then talk about what you hope the residents gain from this experience and what you hope a visitor would gain.
Okay, sure. I think one, I'll go from north to south, from Roosevelt, Central Park Theater, and then heading west, go down Pulaski, and then there are 3 sites, Wyman, Soil Lab, and CCA Academy Perma Park, and then you head south and cut over to Ogden and Drake, and there's the Waka Bell Park. So I think it's really for the residents. I think it's at least twofold. I think all of the, with the exception of Soil Lab in this case, the 4 projects have been developed with community organizations that are based in North Lawndale in partnership with designers, and most of those are national, international practices. I think out of the individuals involved, Antonio Torres, part of Bittertang, is based here in Chicago. But I think really this opportunity to begin to have conversations about their neighborhood and about the types of spaces that they are interested in hosting, and gaining these kind of insights and dialogues around the world in some cases. Blanche and the Central Park Theater group has been in a conversation with Manuel Herz, who's based in Switzerland, talking about kind of the history of the Central Park Theater, talking about the history of Roosevelt, and really how to capture that history, and I think help to spur Central Park Theater Group's efforts to really their recognition of the history and significance of Central Park, and then I think spur their effort to restore it. I might let Blanche, you want to say a few words in terms of that experience of what you've gained, and then I can go through some of the rest.
The Central Park Theater, because you went out for a minute on me. You want to talk about the Central
Yeah.
Park Theater is a community theater, always has been, built by Balaban and Cass and designed by Rap and Rap. It is the mothership of all the theaters in Chicago. And the reason why I say that is the first mechanically air-conditioned theater. And as a young child, I went there as well. That family got its starting point there in North Lawndale, the Balaban and Cass family. It was taken over, not taken over, but saved by the House of Prayer Church of God in Christ in 1971. Everybody had walked away from it. It became in very bad condition. There was even thoughts at one time that it should go away, like many other theaters that we had on Roosevelt Road. But the group that we have at the table now, Preservation Chicago, the Firm, the House of Prayer, School of the Art Institute, North Lawndale Historical and Cultural Society. I want to say this, David, thank you for giving us the opportunity and the Chicago Architectural Foundation to show what a gem it is. And you can go on Open House Chicago and see pictures of the inside of the theater. We also on the 17, I believe I got that date right, 16. Yeah, 16. We will be showing you the inside of the theater. During the Available City exposition 2 weeks ago, what we did, we actually had a video man set up in the lobby where you could come in and tell your stories about that theater, which is it would be a continuation, and it's a documentation. Benny Goodman played there. Jerry Butler sung there. Oh my God. Don Cornelius, while he was across the street at Foremost Liquors as a clerk. So there were so many people that went through that building and that theater that was community driven. And then when the church took it over, Reverend Lincoln Scott continued that community engagement. Now, what we are doing at that theater now, it is gonna open up to the community and give us the joy that we had in the past. Maybe not necessarily movies, but a performing venue that not only the adults of North Lawndale, but the children of North Lawndale can use.
And so to me, I would say, as Blanche is, I think, demonstrating both the opportunity for the community to celebrate its assets and resources, and at the same time create new assets and resources. I think this idea too that Lawndale heritage, in a way, through the activities, is continuing to build its archive. I think the same with the other spaces, Wyman, in terms of the space that Saku Cook has implemented and as kind of shipping container that really is cut into parts to begin to create other spaces that complement Wyman's bike box, bike repair and rental space, that there's now opportunities for gathering adjacent to that space, and maybe even having a small marketplace. Soil Lab, I think, really kind of engaging the community in terms of ideas about production and how just those activities can begin to be a basis for forming a community. In the case of, and so really, I think too, just engaging passersby in terms of curiosity about what's going on. I think everyone that I've talked to in terms of participants have really gotten a lot of supportive inquiries from residents as they see the work. The same with Bittertang in terms of an outdoor pavilion in CCA Academy's Perma Park, which really enables CCA to have this kind of outdoor classroom space that complements the effort to create awareness amongst the students as well as the residents in the surrounding areas to begin to understand the value of healthy food, growing healthy food and healthy eating. And then at Bell Park, I think really bringing back a space that I think we've discovered, me in terms of the biennial, but also the kind of Under the Grid, the group that was working on that project, has really learned the history of Bell Park in terms of how active it was and vital it was decades ago, in terms of some place where youth could go and spend their summers. And so really trying to bring that back through the kind of creation of the painted surface that really talks about what could be other activities on that basketball court and surrounding area. That's by Outpost Office, as well as Studio Barns, really introducing this kind of play structure for youth. So I think all of these things contribute to the efforts of those organizations in some manner. And I think really provide the community with opportunities to enjoy new spaces and really, I think, establish further connections. And to me, the spaces are meant to be generative in terms of looking to also work with other organizations, other residents and youth to begin to think about what are possibilities for other spaces.
Mhm.
I think some of the partnerships have also created unforeseen kind of connections. Like I think Studio Barnes runs a youth program every summer that was very complementary to the youth program that was being run by Under the Grid this summer to talk about the play lot. So I think there are these experiences where youth are getting exposed and engaged in making spaces for their neighborhood. So I think those are the benefits. I think for the city, I think it is to go and see the different spaces. And I think this is for everyone in general. The primary proposition is that within each one of these neighborhoods where there is a high number of city-owned vacant lots, that vacant land could, in working with community organizations in each neighborhood, be the basis for these new sets of spaces that, in fact, provide a range of resources, address a range of interests and needs. And so to me are generative of a new form of urbanism. It doesn't necessarily require the return of large buildings in all those spaces, which would take quite some time to happen. And so that the communities that are present in all of those neighborhoods are actually re-engaged in terms of provided or enabling themselves to create new spaces and opportunities and resources for themselves is important. And I think to me, for visitors to think about the impacts they have in those neighborhoods, but also the potential of this idea as something that could happen across a lot more spaces. There are 15 spaces in total across about 5 neighborhoods, 6 neighborhoods. And so what could be the impact on the neighborhoods and the city as a whole with this idea as well? So it is about kind of projection of other possible spaces.
Ned, you've had the chance to do a few different things, say with spontaneous interventions, which also had a lot of categorization, but was certainly looked at very much from like an architectural standpoint versus a community standpoint. As you look back and you think about learning from Lawndale, are there differences? I mean, can you think through what some of those challenges are about needing to do right by a community over the long haul, needing to do something in a place apart, like.
So, the name Learning from North Lawndale was a play on a book called Learning from Las Vegas, a famous publication from the early 1970s, I believe, by Denise Scott Brown, Robert Venturi, and Steve Eisenhower. And that was a case of 3 academics coming from, and practitioners coming from Philadelphia to the Wild West of Las Vegas, almost like anthropologists, and looking at this kind of low class built environment, right? And seeing if they could derive any kind of insights from it. Fine. So this was a model that architecture, I think, historically has operated under for decades, generations of kind of architects as experts dropping in, kind of doing their thing and getting out. And I think the incredible thing, one of the many incredible things about the biennial, Chicago Biennial this year that David's produced, is really to represent the kind of complete, hopefully, kind of complete flip in architecture culture where initiative comes out of the community in service of the community, in collaboration with experts and people who can provide alternative perspectives and resources and so forth. And I think Learning from North Lawndale actually kind of constituted, in a sense, a kind of occupied a hinge moment, right? Where that kind of relationship between architecture as a discipline and the kind of communities that architecture ostensibly serves, but historically didn't always really serve so much as, superimposed. It was really kind of a pivot moment. And so, David's biennial vision, I think kind of represents a far more exciting vision for the future with a far more healthy relationship between kind of architecture and humanity, frankly.
Well, let's leave the last word to Blanche. What do you feel is the local resident reaction to this, both to the 2006 exhibit and now the updated available city? What kind of response are locals are giving to this, and that you think you're hearing and
I
seeing?
think they've gotten a new love for the neighborhood. It's a one thing I want everybody to understand about North Lawndale. We are a community of resiliency. We are survivors in North Lawndale, and we are a welcoming community, as I stated before to David and other people. A community builds a neighborhood, and a neighborhood builds a city. And North Lawndale is a part of Chicago that has been, will be, and will continue to be recognized by the people that live there. We stand tall. We welcome the people into our neighborhood. And with the biennial and the available city, gave you a glimpse, just a glimpse of what we can do and what we have to offer. I encourage everyone that's on the call tonight to come visit North Lawndale. We do give, the Historical Society do give tours of North Lawndale. Come check out the Central Park Theater. Check out Perma Park. See what we're doing. There's a lot of activities going on in North Lawndale. As my friend Brenda Palmer's Barber, who runs North Lawndale Employment Network, says in her group, U-turn permitted. And North Lawndale is making that U-turn. We're here. We're on the book. So
That's great.
that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I think we're going to call that a wrap. And I'd like to thank Ned and David and Blanche. I'd like to thank Marguerite and Rachel and the entire team at the Biennial for helping us put this together. And thanks to everyone watching. A reminder that all fall long, we have the 2021 Available City Biennial Edition. And throughout the month of October, Open House Chicago. Please look us up for upcoming programs. Our next one is just in 2 days, but we have programs throughout the month. It's a pleasure being with you, and this is a great month to be part of architecture in Chicago. Thanks to the panel. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.